It's great to see you this morning. It really is great to see you this morning after a week sort of shut in. It's nice to get out. You know, I thought I detected a little more energetic chatter before services. I think everybody's glad to be out and glad to be able to associate with others after pretty much a week just shut in at home. We appreciate you being here so much. On this Sunday morning class, we're studying the book of Ephesians and almost ready to begin immediately after that into the book of Colossians. But we're still in Ephesians and we're ready to start chapter 6, the last chapter. So if you'll turn to Ephesians chapter 6, we'll pick up our discussion there. Ephesians chapter 6. These are familiar verses, but also so very important. Ephesians 6, beginning verse 1, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." Again, as I said, those are really familiar verses to us. Probably the first point that we would want to stop to clarify is this: children, obey your parents in the Lord. The phrase "in the Lord" is important to understand. There's some ways it could be taken that I think are absolutely not correct. For instance, children, obey your parents if they are in the Lord. That is, if they are Christians, obey them. But if your parents are not Christians, you don't have to obey them. Well, that wouldn't be right. That's not what this is saying at all. That's not what... Now, in the Lord, the phrase "in the Lord" can mean a Christian, a saved person, one who is in the Lord. But I don't think that's what it means here. So the expression here, I believe, denotes the idea that children should obey their parents in whatsoever the parents tell them to do that is in harmony with the will of God. In other words, if I told my son, go over there to that convenience store and sneak me a candy bar. I think you can get in there and get out and nobody will notice that. Just get me a Hershey's chocolate with almonds and bring it back over to me. Would my child be obligated to obey me if I was instructing them to do something directly contrary to the will of God? Obviously not. Obviously not. And so I really think that that's the concept here. Obey your parents as your parents follow the Lord. In other words, obey them in things that are in harmony with the will of God. Any thoughts or comments, Tom?
Just there in the second verse, it's sort of like a clarifier or compliment to what's being said in the first.
It certainly compliments, yeah.
Because it goes back and quotes one of the 10 Commandments from the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So in that, to understand the first verse, you sort of have to understand what does honor your father and mother mean. So you've got to go back and comprehend what that has to say.
Okay. I think Tom is right. So these verses obviously go together. You're to obey your parents in the Lord. This is the right thing to do. It is right. It is right for children to obey their parents. Honoring thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. As Tom pointed out, this is a quote from Exodus 20, verse 12, one of the 10 Commandments: honor thy father and thy mother. There's a lot of ways that honor can be bestowed. One is simply the way we act toward our parents. And I think all children can probably do better in honoring their parents. I know I could have done better honoring my parents. It's an important instruction. It's a necessary requirement to show honor to your parents. Now, you honor them in many ways. For instance, if my children are faithful to the Lord, as I tried to teach them to be, then that is in a sense that they are honoring me as they live their lives faithfully serving God, because that's what I wanted them to do. That's what I tried to teach them to do. That's what I believe is best for them to do. And so that's sort of a way of honoring. There's lots of ways that you honor your parents. I think the thing that comes to mind first is just, our direct interpersonal interactions, the words that we speak to our parents, showing respect and honor. That's all appropriate. There's just a lot of ways to honor your parents. And it is important instruction to do so. Now, the question that comes is that last part of verse 2. This is the first commandment with promise. If you go back to Exodus 20, I think this is that reference to the way that was instructed in the Ten Commandments. So if start down reading through the Ten Commandments. God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Number one. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of them, and showing mercy to the thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that dwelleth in thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor thy father and mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Did you notice the instructions leading up to that were without specific promised rewards? For instance, when he said, don't make any graven image. Well, just don't do that. But he didn't say, and if you don't, then your harvest will multiply or something like that. He didn't add any promise to the command. And usually it's this expression, the first commandment with promise, is related to the fact that there in verse 12, he states a promise associated with honoring father and mother, that thy days may be long upon the land that the Lord thy God giveth thee. And that's the way it's expressed here as the first commandment with promise. Usually that's the way that's interpreted. There's other ways maybe that you could interpret that. For a little child to be taught to obey and honor their parents, that's really the first thing little children are taught. That's the first commandment that we try to instill into our children, is to be obedient and honoring their parents. So there's some different ways to look at it, but it is a commandment with promise. Now, what about this promise? So here's a kid who died. Here's an 8-year-old child. And this 8-year-old child got cancer and died. Or here's a 10-year-old kid that got killed in a car wreck. But they were really good children. They were very obedient, and they honored their parents. And so has the promise failed? Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. James?
Just like the Proverbs, give a general truth that is applied generally. All of God's commandments can do so. And when sin's involved and other people sin, and because of a sin-sick world, we're going to possibly suffer even though we do well. So you can apply the general truth, but it doesn't always specifically come true in every aspect.
I think that's exactly right. These are what we call proverbial truths. They are generally true. There can be exceptions to them, but these are generally true. When we're studying the book of Proverbs, it's very necessary to keep that in mind. For instance, in Proverbs 22, verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Well, that's generally true. as a proverbial truth. That's usually the case. Are there exceptions to that rule? Yes. Because if you think about it, if Proverbs 22:6 was unequivocally and absolutely always true, then every time, if there was a child that went astray, every time we could blame it on the parents. The kid wouldn't be responsible. It would be the parents' responsibility, because if they'd done their job right, this kid would have never gone astray. Therefore, the kid is not responsible. The parent is responsible. That wouldn't be a fair application, right? So when we're studying Proverbs, we talk about these proverbial truths. One of them I like to point out is, let's see, I had a note here. Proverbs 18:22. Proverbs 18:22. Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing and obtaineth favor of the Lord. That's usually true. But there's some people who have found a wife and it was not a good thing. Again, the nature of proverbial truths has to be taken into consideration here. When it says if you obey and honor your parents, then you will have a long and fruitful life. It will be well with thee, and you can live long on the earth. Usually true. If you think about it, kids that are disobedient have a lot more potential to get themselves into all kinds of trouble and maybe even physical harm. So obedient and respectful and honoring children are usually way better off in the long run, and that's what this is saying. Tom?
Just looking at how that verse in Exodus comes into play, it comes out for, how are you to serve the Lord? You're supposed to honor him as God, not have any other gods before him, not use his name in vain. So that leads up to it, and then it comes into this honoring first. Then Moses goes through and gives, and Joshua follows up that instruction. Teach them, read them this law, put the law under his lamp, under the mantelpost, do all this. Bring them up, knowing God, knowing who he is, so that you don't go out and do these other things that God has told you not to do.
Yeah.
So in doing those, it goes back to that other thing. That is one way that you're honoring your mother and father.
Yeah.
You're doing what they've instructed you in the Lord.
Yeah.
And here to these people that he's writing and giving this law to, they had a promise of inheriting the land. And if they did so, and they honored their parents in these things, they were going to be blessed with the land.
Yeah.
If you take that spiritually, our parents or your parents bring it up that way, looking to that life in heaven with Christ, you're going to receive that as well. If you don't, your hope is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Throughout the last chapter, I understand they don't have chapters in the letter itself, but they talked about submission a lot. So we're supposed to submit to one another. Wives are supposed to be subject to the husbands. The church is supposed to be subject to God. And I think the children, this is their first step in submission, right? This is how we initially learn how to submit to anybody, just to our parents. And so if we don't learn that first lesson, the promises of anything good probably will fail to us if we can't figure that out. And it goes into the context, I think, of all of that submitting. We're going to have to learn to submit to a lot of people, ultimately to God, and then to a lot of other people if we can't figure it out as a young kid to our parents.
There's a lot about submission, isn't there? The whole structure of things is sort of woven into the concept of being willing to submit and to honoring authority. And so, as you said, I think rightly, James, as parents, the first job we have is to teach our children to respect authority, to do what they must do, to be obedient and honoring. And that is the first job of parents, and a very important one. And not to get too political here, but this is one of the things that's really failing in our culture. That's not being taught. And actually, children are being coached to believe that they shouldn't obey and honor parents. Yeah.
So there's two commandments. There's an obedience commandment and there's an honoring commandment. You can obey, but not honor. So honor means to place value upon. So at some point, the just the obedience, you're fearful of the punishment. But at some point you see the value in their instruction and following them. That's the ultimate outcome of children before they become adults, is to value in the instruction.
That's a good distinction. I think you're exactly right. To obey is one thing. To honor is a higher bar. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. All right, anybody else? Okay. Verse 4, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Real quickly, look at the parallel statement. We'll be going into Colossians next, but in Colossians 3:21, we said over and over again, there's a lot of parallelisms between Ephesians and Colossians. But Colossians 3:21, the parallel statement is, fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. I think the New American Standard Version says, lest they be exasperated. How would a father do that? How would a father make his children discouraged or exasperated? Just cause them to be angry, or he says, don't provoke them to wrath. How might a father do that? Any thoughts?
And no praise, you can tear down but never build up, and you can have set unrealistic levels of obedience where it's not natural or right for that circumstance. There's lots of ways you can do it.
Yeah. I especially like the first thing you said there, James. If we're just so constantly negative with them, never encouraging, never building up, then we can just completely discourage them from even trying. They just become exasperated. There's no use trying. Dad will never be happy with me no matter what I do, kind of a reaction. We have a friend in Knoxville who's a psychologist, and I remember him in teaching along these lines. He had a rule that you should, as parents, you should try to have 2 positive things to every 1 negative thing that you have to deal with. As parents, we're going to have to deal with negatives. And we're going to have to correct them and instruct them and punish them when they've done things that they shouldn't do. That's absolutely going to be the case. It's totally necessary. You're going to have to deal with some negative things with kids. And they're going to act out. They're going to have to be corrected. And so you got to do that. And that's, unfortunately, as parents, that's the thing that we do automatically because it's right in our face and we've got to make them toe the line. And so it's easy to do the negative part. Not always pleasant, but it's easy because you have to. Purposely planning to be positive when you can be is a harder measure. And that requires conscious effort. But he said his rule of application, I think a pretty good one. Try to be twice as positive as you are negative. 2 positives for every 1 negative. You're going to have to work at that. But if you don't, what happens is that kids get discouraged and are likely to give up. And we don't want that to happen. I think I saw your hand, Ellen.
So, honoring your parents, sometimes there's sibling rivalry, there's partiality between parents, and that can also cause a lot of harm. A child may feel like they're not loved, or they don't show the parent the obedience and honor that they deserve. And that can be very hard on the whole entire family.
Okay, it's interesting observation. And when you were saying that, the thing that immediately came to my mind was Jacob and his 12 sons and how he was overtly favoring Joseph. And I think it did what this passage is saying. It provoked wrath in the other brothers. They became discouraged and exasperated that they weren't pleasing their fathers like Joseph was. And so, that's probably a good case study of that very thing. Paul.
I've got a couple of comments to add. The first one is when you experience hypocrisy, when your parents are that would are saying, do this, but they're doing that
Yeah.
opposite.
Yeah.
You know, that can lead to some anger, trust, and all that.
That's gonna discourage them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the second one, and I can say I didn't experience this, but I had a friend of mine where his father was abusive to the mother.
Oh, absolutely.
And it led to just total breakdown in that family. They're not even speaking anymore because of the damage that was done.
Yeah.
And his life's been kind of a struggle. You know?
So abusive behavior is always going to be devastating. And I think that would be out here at the extreme of this spectrum. But I think we could, if we moved back from that, we could still be doing a bad job and discouraging our kids, even if we're not being, physically abusive. But I think you're exactly right. Other thoughts here? Anybody? So he uses an expression there that we talk about quite a bit. The nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. The word nurture suggests love and care and feeding and tending. You're nurturing a child. That begins, day one, hour one, when a newborn comes into this world. And in fact, even among tiny infants, the nurturing process is critical to their well-being. And there's a thing with infant children called failure to thrive. And sometimes children who don't get that loving nurture, even in the first days of life, they won't do well. So that nurturing, I think we have a pretty good handle on it. But it's easy to nurture a babe in arms. But I've got a teenager, and he's a mess. He's a handful. I'm having all kind of trouble with this teenager, and I'm thinking about kicking him out of the house. He's just terrible. I'm all undone with him. You know what I'm still supposed to be doing to that teenager is nurturing him. I still need to nurture him. He's not a baby in arms anymore, but he still needs some nurturing from his parents. And then the word admonition. So the nurturing is that positive side. The admonition is the negative side. Admonition suggests the idea of correction. You've got to correct them sometimes. A lot of times. You've got to correct them. You've got to tell them when they're wrong and make that right. And again, to me, that's the harder part of parenting is, you just want to look the other way or sweep it under the rug. I just don't feel like dealing with that right now. It's just, oh man, I've had a hard day at work and everybody's been demanding my attention. Now I come home and I got a bunch of problems with the kids. I don't even want to think about it. I'm just going to ignore it. Well, I'm failing to do the admonishing that's necessary. So I want to tell you, parenting is not an easy job. Not easy at all. I'm of the opinion that it's getting harder and harder in our modern day world. There are some influences and other thing, the societal influences, the cultural changes, and the way the effective means of communication, social media, and all kinds of media make it harder and harder, I think, for parents to do this God-given job, which is so vitally important. It's not easy. It's not an easy job, but it has to be done. Sometimes you have to tell parents, hey, listen, you wanted kids, you got them. Now do the work. I think all young couples, most all young couples want to have children. That's great. That's a wonderful thing. They should have children if they can. But if you want the kids, understand that you're signing on to a never-ending job here. You got to do the work now. You got to do the work, and it's never ending, and it's not going to end. I remember years ago. Do any of you remember the old Parade magazine that came out in the Sunday newspaper? This is years ago, but they interviewed a woman who was over 100, maybe 104 or something like this. And in the course of the interview, the woman expressed great concerns for her daughter. And she just wasn't sure how her daughter was going to turn out. She was just really worried about how the long-term well-being of her daughter. Her daughter was 76 years old, and this 104-year-old mother was worrying about how her daughter was going to turn out. That's just indicative of parenting. You have the kids, great, it's a wonderful thing, but you got work. Now you got lifelong work, and you got to do it. Thought, Tom?
Looking at the U of America standard, it says, bring them up with discipline and instruction of the Lord. It goes back to the parent. They have to have an understanding. One is the Lord's discipline, one is the Lord's instruction. If you're not doing that to start with, then, it's going to be easy to provoke them into doing things. So you have a responsibility. When you discipline, is it in harmony with the teaching of the Lord? When you instruct, are you giving them the instruction of the Lord? If you're not, and you go to start doing things and you start telling, well, you need to do this because the Bible tells you to, and you don't know what the Bible tells you, you're sort of falling on deaf ears. They're not good. So there's also a responsibility there at the parents, especially the father, that he needs to know what that discipline is and what the instructions of the Lord's are. So there's a knowledge base that's there. If you don't have it, then how can you do what?
You can't teach what you don't know, right?
Right.
Yeah. And again, that's a big failure in our world. Parents are trying to parent kids, and they don't even know the rules themselves. So that is a problem. Okay, anybody else? Any other thoughts here? Okay. So again, those first 4 verses, well known, but there's a lot of truth there that needs to be meditated upon. The next few verses, still in the same context, same mode. Verse 5, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and singleness of heart, as unto Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. And ye masters, do the same things to them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there any respect of persons with him. All right, servants and masters. Now, one of the things we always point out here is that this is, we always want to use this passage talking about our responsibilities on the job. And I think it is certainly a fair application. But we remember that the servants and masters here were slaves and their owners. So this is talking about those in servitude, those who were enslaved. So here's a Christian. Here's a guy, he's a slave. But he learned the truth of the gospel and he obeyed it and he became a Christian. Now what? Maybe I can just forget all this slave and master business and go about doing whatever I please. No, even servants, and this is surely talking to those servants who were who were Christians. Obey them that are your masters according to the flesh. Do what they tell you to do. Be obedient. You're still obligated to be obedient to your master with fear and trembling in singleness of heart as unto Christ. Serve your master as though you're serving Christ, because as the text goes on to spell out, you actually are. And that's going to be noted and you'll be rewarded accordingly. But if you are an obedient servant, as you're supposed to be, in fact, you should serve your master as though you were serving Christ himself. And that will be duly noted by the Lord and you'll be rewarded accordingly. Do not imagine that you can disobey your parent, or your master rather, just because you are in Christ. So again, thankfully, we are well removed from physical servitude in our place in the world. There's places in the world where there are still slaves, but in our part of the world, for a long time, there's been no slaves. And we don't deal with that anymore. Thankfully, we don't deal with that anymore. I do think that this passage, though, is still applicable to those who have authority over us in various realms. And here, I think the application that we most often make is on the job. I'm an employee. I have a boss. We wouldn't talk. I really doubt that we would refer to our boss on the job as our master, but he is our boss, and the concept here is valid. So what do? You do what you're told on the job. You do what you're told, as though you are serving Christ Himself. Again, this would the big caveat to this would be as if they told us to do something that was sinfully wrong. That would be obviously a caveat to this. But insomuch as what they're telling us is not a violation of the will of God, then we should be obedient to them. Verse 6 is pretty neat. Not with eye service as men please. Eye service. My boss is nearby. He's watching. While he's watching, man, I'm working like crazy. I'm just working as hard as I can. But when he steps out and he's not observing, I quit. I'm not doing, I don't even try. I'm not putting forth any effort at all. When he comes back in and can see me, I'm busy again. Well, that would be the idea of eye service, just trying to please a man. But he says, do it as servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. And isn't it interesting that relationship, and that was a much more severe relationship than our employee-employer relationship is. This was a severe relationship, but even in that severe relationship, do what you're supposed to do. Do it heartily. Do it with, verse 7, do it with good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men. Understand, this is part of your duty as a Christian, to act this way. And verse 8, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall receive of the Lord, whether it be bond or free. In other words, you'll be rewarded. You'll be rewarded by God for doing what you're supposed to do, even in this relationship of master and servant. I think the application of employee and employer would be the same. If you're a good employee on the job, the Lord notices that. Isn't it interesting that He notices that? And He will reward you accordingly. On the other hand, if you're a bad employee on the job, you're one of those guys who just, he serves with eye service. He's only working when somebody's watching him, and when they're not watching, he's not doing anything. Even if the boss never found that out, the boss will probably find that out, but even if the boss never found that out, the Lord would notice. We're obligated in this relationship. All relationships are governed by the Lord, and He is observing that. Just know that it's an expectation that we have. And then He flips the coin over on verse 9. Ye masters, do the same things to them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there any respect of persons with Him. Just a quick word of warning to the bosses, in this case, the masters. But know that the Lord is observing what you do too, and how you're treating those who are under your authority. It was a master and a slave, or a boss and an employee. Know that the Lord is observing that as well. And God's not a respecter of persons. You're not going to get a pass or be excused because you're the boss. The Lord is no respecter of persons here. He values that lowly employee as much as He does the highest guy in the business. There's no respect of persons. God, He doesn't care about rank. He just expects everybody to do what is right in their role. Tom?
He was sold into slavery, came to work in Potiphar's house. Well, he rose in Potiphar's house where, Potiphar wasn't always there, but he was always going about doing what he was doing. And then, the situation with Potiphar's wife rose, and he goes to prison, and basically he does the same thing there. He rises up because it was more important for him to do what was right than to sit around and tell about it.
Joseph's a great example of these very principles, isn't he? Yeah, you're right. Anybody else a thought? Okay, so again, not hard to understand these verses, but certainly applying them is important. Not always easy. but important. Let's read just a little bit further here. Verse 10, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take upon the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Now, I'm going to stop there before we actually read the various elements of the Christian armor. But we're instructed of the necessity to be strong. And he says in verse 11, put on the whole armor. We'll talk about that armor in a minute. But before we get to that, why would we need to be armored up? You know, this is a little harder for us, I think, to envision than it might have been for the people who initially received these epistles, because they would have a very good sense of a Roman soldier in full armor. There would be no stretch of their imagination to picture that. Harder for us probably, but we can do it. But the whole armor of God is necessary. Before we get to what the elements of that armor are, he says it's necessary to have this armor, the whole armor of God, to be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. The devil is wily, right? He has all kinds of schemes and tricks up his sleeve. He has an endless array of tactics that he uses. We might tie this into 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11. 2 Corinthians 2:11 says, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. So the devil has lots of devices. He's a wily character. He has all kinds of tricks and schemes that he will try to employ. If we're going to be able to resist all the tricks that the devil will throw at us, then we're going to need this whole armor of God. Because the devil, you can say a lot of things about the devil, but one thing that you can say without fear of contradiction is he never gives up. He is constantly at work. I've always thought that the best proof of that was that the devil even tried to get Jesus to sin. You know, you would think if the devil, there's no use. I'm not even going to waste my time on that guy. I wouldn't be able to get at him no matter what I did. No, the devil didn't think that way. He even tried to get Jesus to sin. So that's how tireless that Satan is at pursuing his goals. And his goals are to ruin us spiritually, to get us to sin and to fall and be lost eternally. That's what he's working at endlessly. And we're going to need all the strength and all the armament that we can possess in order to be able to resist the wiles, the devices, the tricks that Satan will use against us. Now he says in verse 12, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's kind of an interesting verse. And if you left off the first part of it, we wrestle against principalities, against powers. You know, you might think that he's talking about individuals in positions of power, human beings in positions of power. And there are some really bad people in positions of power in our world. There's just no doubt about that. I don't think that's what he's talking about in this verse. Did you know? We wrestle not against flesh and blood. So whatever he mentions after that is not flesh and blood. In other words, these are not human enemies. These are not human enemies that we're wrestling against. We're wrestling against principalities and powers, rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. The picture I think that Paul is wanting us to get here is there's a great spiritual warfare going on. all the forces of evil against the forces of good. Again, I've seen this verse used to try to make application to world powers and to evil rulers. And there are plenty of evil rulers in this world. But if you look at the verse and the way it's constructed, there's a contrast. We're not wrestling against flesh and blood. We're not wrestling against human powers. We're wrestling against spiritual powers. And so this is a concept that is kind of easy to put out of mind. And we're just going along our daily business. We're just trying to do our daily things. And we don't often contemplate the fact we're engaged in a great spiritual warfare. There's a great battle of evil versus good. And it's been going on. It's going to continue to go on until time ends. It'll finally be brought to a close. We know the outcome. But right now we're in the midst of the battle. And so since we're in the midst of this great spiritual battle, that's why we need to be fully armed up in order to succeed. Thoughts here, anybody? James?
Sometimes we can take comfort when we see an enemy and we can, we send out spy planes and we see that they're gathering in certain places, and we can have comfort that we might be prepared. But God tells us that things are going on that we don't quite understand about, so He needs us to be prepared in His way.
Yeah.
Not ones that we think we're okay because we see it. There's things that are happening behind the scenes that are too much for us alone.
Yeah.
So we have to rely on Him and what He provides to us to be safe.
Yeah.
And so we've got to trust Him, right?
I think exactly right. Tom?
It's easy for us to, a lot of times, take, individuals be personified in the evil, so we are sort of going after the individual, not going after the influence that is driving that individual. And I think that's what Paul is writing about. Because he talks about other places, the civil authority and things like that in power. We know that the most of the emperors of Rome were very evil individuals. But it was that driving force that made them evil that was really the problem that Paul was talking about. Not necessarily, they're evil, but the greater evil is this overlaid thing that they pay homage to. And that's a problem a lot of times. But we like to demonize an individual so that we can sort of break down and we get rid of that individual, everything will be okay. Well, Paul said that's not the case.
As long as this world stands, this battle is going to keep going on. Yeah. I think you're right. Mike?
The Bible says the God of this world is the devil. And it also says if we resist the devil, he'll flee from you. So does that mean if I resist temptation enough, it will subside?
I don't think he will subside, but we can drive him away. But it's going to, every day you have to keep doing that. It's not like he'll quit trying. He didn't even quit trying with Jesus. After the temptation of Jesus, he didn't stop. The temptation against Jesus didn't stop. All right, we're out of time. It's a good place to stop. Let's be prepared next week, Lord willing, to talk about that spiritual armor and all the various components of it so that we can stand. Thanks, everybody.